I never meant to become a thief, but desperation has a way of reshaping even the most virtuous soul. The night I slipped the Duchess's ruby necklace into my pocket, I told myself it was survival, not sin, and yet, the moment that crimson stone touched my skin, I knew that some thefts cannot be undone. My name is Eleanor Ashwood, and I arrived at Thornfield Hall on a grey October morning when the mist clung to the Yorkshire moors like a veil over a widow's face. The estate rose before me through the fog, all dark stone and Gothic spires, its windows watching me like hollow eyes. I had come to serve as a companion to Lady Marguerite Ashworth, the elderly aunt of the Duke, a temporary position secured through a distant acquaintance who owed my late father a favor. Temporary, I reminded myself as the carriage wheels ground to a halt on the gravel drive. I only needed to endure a few months, save every penny, and perhaps, just perhaps, my family's small cottage in Devonshire would not fall to creditors. The butler, a tall man with silver hair and an expression carved from granite, led me through the entrance hall without a word of welcome. I clutched my worn traveling case and followed, my boots echoing on marble floors that had been polished to a mirror shine. Portraits lined the walls, generations of Ashworths gazing down at me with the particular disdain the aristocracy reserves for those who must work for their bread. I kept my chin raised. I was poor, yes, but I was not without pride. Lady Marguerite received me in her private sitting room, a space cluttered with porcelain figurines and faded damask curtains that smelled of rosewater and age. She was smaller than I expected, her spine curved with years, her white hair pinned beneath a lace cap. But her eyes, pale blue and sharp as broken glass, missed nothing. "You are younger than I anticipated," she said, studying me over the rim of her teacup, "and prettier. That will be a problem." I did not know how to respond, so I said nothing. She set down her cup with a delicate clink. "My nephew, the Duke, does not care for disruptions. His wife died 2 years ago, and he has not been the same since. You will keep to your duties, Miss Ashwood. You will not wander where you are not wanted, and you will not, under any circumstances, attempt to catch his attention." I assured her I had no such intentions. I had come to work, not to dream of dukes. My heart had been buried alongside my father 6 months prior, and I had no desire to resurrect it for a man I had never met. But fate, I would learn, cares nothing for our intentions. I saw him for the first time that evening. I had been arranging Lady Marguerite's embroidery silks by the window when movement in the garden below caught my eye. A man walked alone among the dying roses, his dark coat stark against the autumn gold of fallen leaves. He moved slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, his head bowed as though in conversation with ghosts. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the weight he carried in every step. The Duke of Ashworth. Gabriel, I had heard the servants whisper his Christian name in the kitchens, though none dared speak it to his face. He was perhaps 30 years of age, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. When he paused and lifted his face toward the gray sky, I caught a glimpse of his profile, all sharp angles and shadows, and something in my chest tightened unexpectedly. I stepped back from the window, my cheeks warm with shame. Lady Marguerite's warning echoed in my mind. I had not come here to look at him. I had come here to save what little remained of my life. The first weeks passed without incident. I read aloud to Lady Marguerite, accompanied her on short walks through the portrait gallery, and listened to her endless stories of the family's illustrious past. She spoke often of the late Duchess Vivian, always in tones of careful neutrality that told me more than any confession could. Vivian had been beautiful, she said. Vivian had been spirited. Vivian had been perhaps too spirited for her own good. I did not ask what she meant. I sensed the question was not welcome. The Duke himself remained a distant figure, appearing only at dinners where I was not present and occasionally crossing my path in the corridors. Each time he acknowledged me with a curt nod and nothing more, his gray eyes sliding past me as though I were no more significant than the wallpaper. I told myself I preferred it this way. Invisibility was safety, but the house would not let me remain invisible for long. It began with the room on the third floor. I discovered it by accident one afternoon when I took a wrong turn searching for the library. The corridor dead-ended at a door, its wood darker than the others, its brass handle tarnished with neglect. I tried the knob without thinking, and to my surprise, it turned. The room beyond had clearly belonged to a woman. Dust sheets covered the furniture like shrouds, and the air tasted stale, untouched by living breath for what must have been years. A vanity stood near the window, its mirror clouded with grime. A wardrobe loomed in the corner, its doors slightly ajar. And on the dressing table, half hidden beneath a fold of yellowed lace, something glittered. I should have left. Every instinct told me to close the door and walk away. But curiosity, that most dangerous of virtues, drew me forward. The necklace lay coiled like a sleeping serpent, its chain of gold filigree delicate as spider silk. At its center hung a ruby the size of a wren's egg, deep red and impossibly luminous despite the dimness of the room. I had never seen anything so beautiful. I had never seen anything so valuable. One stone, I thought. One stone could save my mother's cottage. One stone could pay off the debts my father left behind. One stone could give me back my future. My hand trembled as I reached for it. I did not take it that day. I returned to my duties with my heart pounding and my conscience screaming, and I told myself I would never go back to that room. But the necklace had planted itself in my mind like a seed, and over the following weeks it grew into an obsession I could not uproot. I learned, through careful eavesdropping, that the room had belonged to the late Duchess. Her belongings had been left untouched since her death, the Duke unable to bear the task of sorting through them. The necklace, I gathered, had been a wedding gift, the Ashworth ruby passed down through generations to each new bride. It was priceless, it was forgotten, and no one, it seemed, ever entered that room. The temptation became unbearable. On the night I finally surrendered to it, a storm raged over the moors. Thunder shook the windows, and lightning turned the sky white. And I crept through the darkened corridors with a candle clutched in my trembling hand. The household slept. The servants were in their quarters, Lady Marguerite in her chambers with her evening draught of laudanum. The Duke, I knew, often spent his nights in the library, drinking brandy alone until dawn. The door opened as easily as before. The room waited for me, unchanged, the dust motes swirling in the candlelight like restless spirits. I crossed to the dressing table, lifted the necklace, and fastened it around my throat. The effect was immediate. The ruby, which had been cold against my skin, suddenly grew warm. Then warmer still. I raised my hand to touch it, and beneath my fingertips I felt something impossible. A pulse. Faint at first, then stronger. A rhythmic thudding that matched no heartbeat of my own. I gasped and stumbled backward, but I could not bring myself to tear the necklace away. The pulsing continued, steady and strangely soothing, and with each beat, something flickered at the edges of my vision. Images, fragments. A woman in white standing at a window, her golden hair unbound. A man's hand reaching for hers. The scent of jasmine and the echo of laughter, bright and brief, swallowed by silence. I did not understand what I was seeing. I only knew that the necklace was not merely a jewel, it was a vessel, and whatever it contained had been waiting, perhaps for years, for someone to set it free. The candle guttered and died, plunging the room into darkness. I should have been afraid. Instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me, as though invisible hands had steadied my trembling shoulders. The storm still howled outside, but within that forgotten chamber, the air grew still. "Keep it," a voice whispered, though whether it came from within me or without, I could not say. "Keep it, and I will show you everything." I fled the room with the necklace still around my throat, my pulse racing, my thoughts a chaos of terror and wonder. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my narrow bed in the servants' wing, one hand pressed to the ruby, feeling its quiet, impossible heartbeat against my palm. I had come to Thornfield Hall as a companion. I had become a thief, and now it seemed I had become something else entirely, something I did not yet have a name for. The first light of dawn crept through my window, pale and hesitant, and with it came the certainty that my life had changed irrevocably. The ruby pulsed gently, warm as a living thing, and in the distance I heard footsteps in the corridor, steady and slow. The Duke was awake. The house was stirring, and I, Eleanor Ashwood, carried against my skin a secret that beat like a heart. What I did not yet know, what I could not have imagined, was that the necklace had not chosen me by accident. Vivian, the late Duchess whose ghost I had only begun to sense, had been waiting for someone like me. And the Duke, that cold and grieving man who barely knew my name, was at the center of a mystery I would soon have no choice but to unravel. But that morning, as I dressed and hid the necklace beneath my high-collared gown, I thought only of survival. I would sell the ruby, I would save my family, and I would disappear from Thornfield Hall before anyone discovered what I had done. It was a simple plan. It might even have worked, if only the dead had been willing to let me go. The days that followed my theft were a torment of nerves and deceit. I wore the necklace always, hidden beneath my bodice, where its steady pulse became as familiar as my own heartbeat. I told myself I would find a way to sell it, that I would write to a jeweler in London, that I would invent some story about an inheritance. But each time I tried to form a plan, the ruby seemed to grow warmer against my skin, and the fragments of vision would return, unbidden and impossible to ignore. I saw her in glimpses. Vivian, the late Duchess whose jewel I now carried like a second heart. She appeared to me not as a specter, but as memory made visible, impressions that flickered behind my eyes when I least expected them. I would be pouring Lady Marguerite's morning tea and suddenly smell jasmine so strongly that my hand would tremble. I would be walking the portrait gallery and hear laughter, bright and musical, echoing from nowhere. Once, as I passed a window overlooking the garden, I saw a woman in white standing among the roses, her golden hair loose about her shoulders, and when I blinked, she was gone. I was not frightened, not exactly. The presence felt less like haunting and more like longing, as though Vivian were trying desperately to tell me something she had never been able to say in life. But what could a dead woman want from me? A stranger, a thief, a nobody who had stolen her most precious possession. The answer, I would discover, was far simpler and far more complicated than I could have imagined. It was Lady Marguerite who first noticed something amiss. She had sharper eyes than I gave her credit for, and one afternoon, as I read aloud from a novel she had chosen, she interrupted me mid-sentence. "You are distracted, Miss Ashwood. You have been distracted for days. Is there something troubling you?" I lowered the book to my lap, my pulse quickening. "No, my lady, I am quite well." She studied me with that unsettling gaze of hers, the one that seemed to peel back layers of pretense. "You have circles beneath your eyes. You start at shadows. And twice now I have seen you press your hand to your chest as though checking for something hidden there." My fingers twitched toward the necklace before I could stop them. I forced my hand to remain still. "It is nothing, my lady. Perhaps the change of climate. I am not accustomed to the Yorkshire air." She did not look convinced, but she let the matter drop with a wave of her thin hand. "Very well, but I warn you, Miss Ashwood, secrets have a way of festering in this house. Whatever you are hiding, it will find its way to the light eventually." Her words haunted me for the rest of the day. I retreated to my small room that evening and removed the necklace for the first time since I had taken it. The ruby lay in my palm, its pulse faint but persistent, and I stared at it as though it might offer answers. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. The stone pulsed once, twice, And then the vision came. I was no longer in my room. I stood in the portrait gallery, though it was brighter than I had ever seen it, the chandeliers blazing with candlelight, the air warm with the scent of beeswax and perfume. A woman stood before the largest portrait, her back to me, her golden hair swept up in an elaborate arrangement of curls and pearls. She wore a gown of deep blue silk, and at her throat the ruby necklace gleamed like a drop of blood. Vivian. I knew it without being told. She turned, and I saw her face for the first time. She was beautiful, achingly so, with delicate features and eyes the color of spring leaves. But there was something in her expression that made my heart clench. A sadness so profound it seemed to radiate from her like heat from a flame. She looked directly at me, through me, and then she spoke, her voice a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Find the truth. Set us both free." The vision shattered. I gasped and stumbled, catching myself on the edge of my narrow bed, the necklace clutched so tightly in my fist that the chain bit into my palm. My heart raced, my skin was slick with cold sweat. Set us both free. What truth? What chains bound her spirit to this jewel, and why had she chosen me to break them? I did not sleep that night. I lay awake with the necklace beside me on the pillow, watching its ruby heart pulse in the darkness, and I made a decision that would change everything. I would not sell the necklace, not yet. First, I would discover what Vivian wanted me to know. My investigation began in the library. Thornfield Hall possessed an impressive collection of books, floor-to-ceiling shelves of leather-bound volumes that smelled of dust and forgotten knowledge. I had been given permission to borrow books for Lady Marguerite's entertainment, so my presence there would not arouse suspicion. But it was not novels I sought. I found the family records in a locked cabinet near the window, and with a hairpin and a skill I had learned in leaner times, I opened it without leaving a trace. Inside were ledgers, letters, and a thick leather journal embossed with the Ashworth crest. I pulled it free and began to read. The journal had belonged to the old Duke, Gabriel's father, dead these 10 years. His entries were terse and businesslike, recording births, deaths, marriages, and financial transactions with equal indifference. I skimmed through pages of tedium until I reached the year of Gabriel's wedding. "My son has married Vivian Hartwell, daughter of the Baron of Whitmore," the entry read. "She is young and beautiful, and he is besotted. I fear he has made a poor choice. The Hartwells are not what they seem." I turned the pages faster, searching for more. The entries grew sporadic after the wedding, and the old Duke's health had clearly declined. But one passage, written mere months before Vivian's death, made me pause. "The girl is unwell. She wanders the halls at night, speaking to shadows. Gabriel insists it is grief over the loss of their hopes for an heir. But I have seen her eyes. There is something in her that does not belong to this world. The Hartwell blood carries a taint, and I fear my son will pay the price." A taint. What did that mean? I thought of the visions, the whispers, the way the necklace pulsed with what felt like life. Had Vivian possessed some gift, some sensitivity to the unseen that her father-in-law had mistaken for madness? I was so absorbed in my reading that I did not hear the door open. "Miss Ashwood." The voice struck me like a blow. I slammed the journal shut and spun around, my heart in my throat. The Duke of Ashworth stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the lamplight of the corridor beyond. His expression was unreadable, his gray eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my knees weak. "Your Grace," I stammered, rising so quickly that I nearly overturned the chair. "I was merely looking for a book for Lady Marguerite." He stepped into the room, and I instinctively stepped back. He moved with the controlled grace of a predator, all coiled tension and suppressed power. Up close, I could see the shadows beneath his eyes, the lines of strain around his mouth. He was handsome. Devastatingly so, but it was a beauty carved by suffering, sharpened by sleepless nights and unspoken grief. "That journal," he said quietly, belonged to my father. It is not suitable reading for a companion." I swallowed hard. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I did not mean to intrude." He studied me for a long moment, and I felt as though he were seeing through every layer of my deception, past the lies, past the hidden necklace, straight into the guilty core of my soul. But when he spoke again, his voice was not accusatory. It was tired. "What did you read?" I hesitated. The question felt like a trap, but something in his tone, a weariness that bordered on defeat, made me answer honestly. "Only fragments, Your Grace. About the Hartwells. About your late wife." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he would order me from the room, from the house, from his life entirely. Instead, he crossed to the window and stood with his back to me, staring out at the darkness beyond the glass. "My wife was not mad," he said, so softly I almost did not hear him. Whatever my father believed, whatever the servants whispered, Vivian was not mad. She was gifted, cursed perhaps, but not mad. I did not know what to say. The ruby pulsed against my chest, warm and insistent, and I pressed my hand to it without thinking. He turned. His eyes dropped to my hand, to the place where it rested over my heart, and something flickered across his face. Suspicion? Recognition? I could not tell. "You remind me of her," he said, and the words were so unexpected that I could only stare, not in appearance, but in the way you look at shadows, in the way you listen to silence. "I do not understand," I whispered. "Neither do I, Miss Ashwood. Neither do I." He left without another word, his footsteps echoing down the corridor until they faded into nothing. I stood alone in the library, trembling, the journal still clutched in my hands, and I realized with sudden, terrifying clarity that the Duke was not the cold, distant man I had believed him to be. He was a man in pain, a man haunted not by his wife's ghost, but by the mystery of her death. And somehow, impossibly, he had seen something in me that connected me to her. I returned the journal to its place and locked the cabinet. But as I crept back to my room, the necklace burning against my skin, I knew that everything had changed. I could no longer remain invisible. The Duke had noticed me. The dead Duchess had chosen me. And the truth, whatever it was, would not wait forever. That night, the visions came stronger than ever. I dreamed of Vivian standing at the edge of a cliff, the sea crashing far below, her white gown whipping in the wind. She was weeping, her hands pressed to her heart, and beside her stood a figure I could not quite see, a shadow that moved like a man but had no face. "You do not understand," she cried into the storm. "I never meant for any of this." The shadow reached for her. She stepped back, her foot slipping on the wet rock, and I screamed her name even though I had never spoken it aloud. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat, the ruby so hot against my chest that I tore it off and flung it onto the bed. It lay there, pulsing, 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 its crimson light casting strange shadows on the wall. I understood now what Vivian wanted me to find. She had not simply died. She had fallen from the cliffs on the night of a storm, and someone, something, had been with her. The question that would haunt me for the days to come was simple and terrible. Had the Duchess of Ashworth taken her own life, or had she been pushed? And if it was murder, did the grieving Duke I was beginning to care for know more than he had ever confessed? The morning after my vision of the cliff, I resolved to learn everything I could about the night Vivian died. If her spirit had chosen me to uncover the truth, then I would not fail her, no matter how dangerous the answers might prove to be. I began with the servants. In my experience, those who polish silver and sweep ashes know more secrets than any lord or lady. They move through great houses like ghosts themselves, invisible and ever-present. Their ears attuned to whispers their employers believe no one hears. The housekeeper, Mrs. Blackwood, was a formidable woman with iron-gray hair and a manner as starched as her apron. She did not welcome my questions, but I had learned in my years of genteel poverty that persistence and politeness could open doors that money could not. I only ask because Lady Marguerite mentioned the Duchess in passing, I lied smoothly, helping Mrs. Blackwood fold linens in the still room. I did not wish to say anything insensitive. The household still seems to mourn her. Mrs. Blackwood's hands stilled on the fabric. Mourn her, she repeated. Yes, I suppose we do. Though mourning is a complicated thing, Miss Ashwood, when the death itself was so complicated. I kept my expression carefully neutral. Complicated how? She glanced toward the door as though fearing we might be overheard. The Duchess was not well in her final months. She kept to her rooms, refused to see visitors, would not even allow her lady's maid to attend her. And then there were the wanderings. Wanderings? At night. Mrs. Blackwood lowered her voice. She would walk the corridors after midnight, barefoot, in nothing but her nightgown. Sometimes she spoke aloud, though there was no one there. Other times she wept. The maids were frightened of her, truth be told. They thought she was touched. And the Duke? I asked carefully. What did he think? Mrs. Blackwood's expression softened, just slightly. His Grace loved her. Whatever else may be said, that much was true. He brought doctors from London, specialists in nervous disorders. He sat with her for hours, reading to her, holding her hand. But nothing helped. And then came the storm. She fell silent. I waited, barely breathing. The night she died, Mrs. Blackwood continued, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a terrible storm. Thunder and lightning like the wrath of God. His Grace had gone to the village on business and was delayed by the weather. When he returned, the Duchess was already gone. They found her at the base of the cliffs the next morning. I felt cold despite the warmth of the room. Was there any indication that she had not gone alone? Mrs. Blackwood's eyes sharpened. What do you mean? I hesitated, aware that I was treading on dangerous ground. Only that a woman in such a state might have been accompanied. A maid, perhaps, someone who might have tried to stop her. No one saw anything, Mrs. Blackwood said firmly, but there was something in her tone, a brittleness that told me she was not entirely certain. The Duchess went out alone into the storm, and she did not return. That is all anyone knows. But it was not all. I was sure of it. Someone had been with Vivian on that cliff, and someone knew more than they were willing to say. I thanked Mrs. Blackwood for her time and excused myself, my mind racing. The Duke had been away that night. If he had returned to find his wife already dead, then he could not have pushed her. But who else might have had cause to wish her harm? The answer came to me that afternoon, in the form of a visitor. I was reading to Lady Marguerite when the butler announced Dr. Edmund Hale. Lady Marguerite's face tightened almost imperceptibly, and she waved her hand in dismissal. "Tell him I am indisposed," she said. But the doctor was already at the door, a man of perhaps 40 years, with a lean face and pale eyes that reminded me of winter ice. He smiled, but it did not reach those eyes. "My dear Lady Marguerite," he said smoothly, stepping into the room without waiting for permission. "I would not dream of disturbing your rest. I merely came to pay my respects to His Grace, and thought I might inquire after your health while I am here." Lady Marguerite's lips pressed into a thin line. "My health is quite well, Dr. Hale, as it has been every time you have asked for the past 2 years. He inclined his head, still smiling that cold smile. "I am glad to hear it. And who is this charming young woman?" His gaze fell on me, and I felt an instinctive prickle of unease. There was something calculating in the way he looked at me, as though he were measuring me for some purpose I could not fathom. "Miss Eleanor Ashwood," I said, rising to curtsy. "Lady Marguerite's companion." "Ashwood," he repeated. "I do not know the name. You are not from this county?" "No, sir. From Devonshire." "Ah." He studied me a moment longer, then turned his attention back to Lady Marguerite. I shall not keep you, but do tell his grace that I called. There are matters we must discuss, matters of some importance regarding the estate." He departed as abruptly as he had arrived, leaving behind a faint scent of chemicals and something else, something acrid that I could not identify. Lady Marguerite sat rigid in her chair, her hands gripping the armrests. "I do not like that man," she said quietly. "I have never liked him, and I do not trust him." "Who is he?" I asked. "He was Vivian's physician," she replied. "One of the specialists Gabriel brought from London. He treated her in her final months, and he has lingered ever since, circling this family like a vulture waiting for carrion." "What does he want?" Lady Marguerite turned to look at me, and for the first time I saw fear in her sharp blue eyes. "That, Miss Ashwood, is precisely what I would like to know." I did not see the Duke again until that evening. I had taken to walking the grounds after dinner, a habit that allowed me time to think and, I confess, time to feel the necklace pulse against my skin without the constant fear of discovery. The autumn air was cold but clear, the sky a velvet darkness scattered with stars. I was standing near the rose garden, gazing at the distant line of cliffs visible against the horizon, when I heard footsteps behind me. "Miss Ashwood, you should not be out here alone after dark." I turned. The Duke stood a few paces away, his dark coat blending with the shadows, his face pale in the moonlight. He looked tired, as he always did, but there was something else in his expression tonight. A restlessness, a searching. "Forgive me, Your Grace," I said. "I did not mean to cause concern." He moved closer, and I caught the scent of brandy and sandalwood. "You are not afraid of the night? Should I be?" "Most women would be. Most women would stay indoors, safe by the fire, far from the cliffs and the cold and the memory of what happened there." His voice was rough, and I realized with a start that he was not warning me. He was warning himself. The cliffs called to him, perhaps, as they had called to Vivienne. The grief was still so raw that he could not speak of her without it bleeding through. "I am not most women," I said softly. "No." He looked at me then, truly looked at me, and the intensity of his gaze made my breath catch. "No, you are not. There is something different about you, Miss Ashwood. Something I cannot quite name. My wife would have liked you, I think." The mention of Vivian sent a jolt through me. "Did you love her very much?" The question escaped before I could stop it, far too personal, far too bold. I braced myself for his anger. But the Duke only sighed, a sound so weary it seemed to come from the depths of his soul. "I loved her more than I knew how to say. And I failed her. That is the truth I live with every day. How did you fail her?" He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "I did not see how much she was suffering. I thought the doctors would help. I thought time would heal her. I was so certain that I could save her if I only tried hard enough. And then she was gone. And I learned that certainty means nothing in the face of death." My heart ached for him. Without thinking, I reached out and touched his arm. "You could not have known," I said. "No one can predict such things." He looked down at my hand, then up at my face, and something shifted in his expression. The walls he had built around himself seemed to tremble, just for an instant. "You are kind, Miss Ashwood, kinder than I deserve. Everyone deserves kindness, Your Grace." He shook his head slowly. "Not everyone. Some of us have done things that kindness cannot erase." Before I could ask what he meant, he stepped back, withdrawing from my touch as though it burned him. The walls were up again, higher than before. "Go inside," he said. "It is cold, and you will catch your death." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness, and I stood alone in the garden with my hand still raised and my heart pounding against the ruby that pulsed at my breast. I had come to Thornfield Hall as a thief. I had stayed to solve a mystery. But now, watching the Duke's retreating figure, I realized that something far more dangerous had begun to take root within me. I was falling in love with him, It was foolish. It was impossible. He was a duke, and I was a penniless companion with a stolen necklace hidden beneath my gown. Even if he were not still grieving his wife, even if there were no ghost binding us together through visions and whispers, there could be no future for us. Society would never allow it. He would never allow it. And yet the way he had looked at me, the way his voice had softened when he spoke of Vivian, the way he had not pulled away when I touched him, all of it told me that he felt something too. Something he fought against with every fiber of his being. I returned to my room that night and took out the necklace, holding it in the moonlight that streamed through my window. The ruby pulsed steadily, warm and alive. "What happened to you?" I whispered to Vivian, wherever she might be. "What are you trying to tell me?" The answer came not in visions this time, but in words, clear and unmistakable, as though someone stood beside me and spoke directly into my ear. "The doctor. He knows. Find what he hid, and you will find the truth. The doctor, Dr. Edmund Hale. The man with ice in his eyes and secrets in his smile." I clutched the necklace tighter and made a vow. I would find what he had hidden. I would learn the truth of Vivian's death. And if the Duke was innocent, as I desperately hoped he was, I would prove it. But if he was not innocent, if the man I was beginning to love had played any part in his wife's demise, then I would face that truth too, no matter how much it destroyed me. The ruby pulsed once more, as though in agreement, and then fell still. The hunt had truly begun. Finding what Dr. Hale had hidden proved more difficult than I had anticipated. The man was a physician with a practice in the village, and I could hardly walk into his offices and demand to search his files. I needed a subtler approach, and fortune, it seemed, was willing to provide one. 3 days after Vivian's whispered warning, Lady Marguerite fell ill with a chill. It was nothing serious, a touch of fever and a persistent cough, but the Duke insisted on sending for a doctor. To my surprise, he did not summon Dr. Hale. "I will not have that man near my aunt," he said flatly when Mrs. Blackwood suggested it. "Send for Dr. Whitmore from Harrogate instead." The exchange confirmed what I had begun to suspect. The Duke distrusted Dr. Hale as much as Lady Marguerite did. But why? What had the physician done to earn such animosity from the family he had once served? I found my answer not through investigation, but through accident. Lady Marguerite's illness confined her to bed, which meant my duties were temporarily suspended. I used the free hours to explore the house more thoroughly, searching for any clue that might connect Dr. Hale to Vivian's death. It was in the East Wing, a section of the manor that had been closed off and draped in dust sheets, that I discovered the small study. The room had clearly belonged to a man. The furniture was heavy and dark, the shelves lined with medical texts and journals. A desk stood near the window, its drawers locked, but I had become quite skilled with hairpins in recent weeks. Within moments, I had the first drawer open. Inside, I found letters. Dozens of them, bundled together with faded ribbon, all addressed in the same elegant feminine hand. I did not need to read the signature to know who had written them. The necklace pulsed hot against my chest, confirming what my heart already suspected. Vivian had written these letters, and she had written them to Dr. Hale. I sank into the chair and began to read, my hands trembling. The earliest letters were formal, almost clinical. Vivian thanked the doctor for his treatments, described her symptoms in careful detail, expressed hope that his remedies would bring relief. But as the dates progressed, the tone shifted. She wrote of loneliness, of feeling trapped in a house that did not understand her. She wrote of her gift, the visions that had plagued her since girlhood, and her relief at finally finding someone who did not think her mad. "You alone believe me," she had written. "You alone see what I truly am." My stomach turned. Had Vivian fallen in love with her physician? Had there been an affair? I read on, searching for evidence of betrayal, but what I found was something far more disturbing. The later letters spoke not of love, but of fear. Vivian wrote of treatments that left her weak and confused, of medicines that made her see things that were not there, of a creeping terror that she was losing herself piece by piece. "I do not know what is real anymore," one letter read. "The visions have become nightmares. I see shadows where there should be none. I hear whispers that tell me terrible things. Edmund, what have you done to me?" Edmund. She had called him by his Christian name, but the intimacy was not romantic. It was desperate. She had trusted him, and he had used that trust to destroy her. The final letter was dated 3 days before her death. It was short, barely a paragraph, and the handwriting was shaky, almost illegible. "I know now what you have been doing. The medicines were never meant to heal me. You wanted to study my gift, to understand it, to harness it for your own purposes. You have made me into an experiment, and I will not allow it to continue. I am going to tell Gabriel everything. I am going to expose you for what you are." The letter ended there, unsigned, unsent. I sat in the dusty study, the bundle of letters in my lap, and I understood at last what had happened to Vivian Ashworth. She had not been mad. She had been poisoned. Slowly, deliberately, by a man who saw her supernatural gift as a scientific curiosity to be studied and exploited. And when she had threatened to expose him, he had silenced her forever. Dr. Hale had murdered the Duchess. The realization struck me like a physical blow. I pressed my hand to the ruby at my breast, feeling its pulse quicken in response to my racing heart. "Is this what you wanted me to find?" I whispered. The answer came in a rush of warmth, a sense of gratitude so profound that tears sprang to my eyes. Vivian had carried this burden alone for 2 years, unable to rest, unable to move on. And now, finally, someone knew the truth. But knowing was not enough. I had to prove it, and I had to tell the Duke. I found him in the library that evening, standing by the fire with a glass of brandy in his hand. He looked up when I entered, and something in my expression must have alarmed him, because he set down the glass immediately. "Miss Ashwood, what has happened?" I closed the door behind me and crossed the room to stand before him. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain he could hear it. "Your Grace," I began, then stopped. How could I explain what I had discovered? How could I tell him that his wife had been murdered by a man he had invited into their home? I took a breath and started again. "There is something I must tell you. Something about your wife." His face went pale. "What about her?" I reached into my pocket and withdrew the bundle of letters. I found these in the East Wing. They were written by the Duchess to Dr. Hale. He stared at the letters as though they were venomous serpents. "Where did you get these?" There was a study. It must have been his when he was treating her. The letters were hidden in a locked drawer. The Duke took the bundle from my hands. His fingers trembled as he untied the ribbon and began to read. I watched his face transform as he progressed through the pages, watched the confusion give way to horror, watched the horror give way to a rage so cold and terrible that I took an involuntary step backward. When he finished, he stood in silence for a long moment. The fire crackled, the clock ticked, and then, very slowly, he raised his eyes to mine. "He killed her." It was not a question. It was a verdict. "I believe so, Your Grace. She discovered what he was doing to her, and she threatened to expose him. The night she died, he must have followed her to the cliffs and pushed her." The Duke's hand clenched around the letters, crumpling the fragile paper. I brought him into my home. I trusted him with her care. I thought he was helping her, and all along he was destroying her. "You could not have known," I said gently. "He deceived everyone." He looked at me, and the anguish in his eyes was almost more than I could bear. "She tried to tell me. In those final weeks, she tried to tell me something was wrong, and I did not listen. I thought it was the illness speaking. I thought she was confused." He turned away, pressing his fist against the mantelpiece as though he might shatter the stone with his grief. I should have listened. I should have protected her. Instead, I left her alone with a monster, and now she is gone, and I can never tell her how sorry I am. I moved toward him before I could stop myself. My hand touched his shoulder, and he did not pull away. She knows, I said quietly. Wherever she is, she knows. He turned to face me, and we were suddenly very close, close enough that I could see the firelight reflected in his gray eyes, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath. "How can you be so certain?" he asked. I hesitated. The necklace pulsed against my skin, urging me forward, urging me to tell him the truth. "Because she told me," I whispered. His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I reached up and unfastened the top buttons of my gown, just enough to reveal the ruby necklace gleaming against my skin. The Duke's eyes widened. "The Ashworth ruby," he breathed. "Where did you find that?" "In her room. I took it, Your Grace. I am a thief, and I took your wife's necklace, and I intended to sell it to save my family from ruin. But the moment I put it on, something happened. It began to pulse, like a heartbeat, and I began to see things, visions of Vivian, whispers of her voice. She has been guiding me, leading me to the truth. I think she has been waiting for someone who could hear her." I braced myself for his fury. I had confessed to theft, to deception, to wearing his dead wife's most precious possession against my skin. He had every right to cast me out, to summon the constable, to destroy me utterly. But the Duke did not rage. He did not condemn. Instead, he reached out and touched the ruby with trembling fingers. "She spoke to you," he said slowly. "Through this. Yes. And she led you to discover the truth about Hale. Yes." He was silent for a long moment, his fingers still resting on the stone. I could feel the pulse of the ruby intensifying beneath his touch, as though Vivian herself were reaching across the veil to connect with him one final time. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "I have prayed for 2 years to understand what happened to her. I have begged God, begged the universe, begged anyone who might listen to give me answers. And all this time, she was trying to reach me. She was trying to tell me, and I could not hear her." A tear slipped down his cheek, and without thinking, I reached up and brushed it away. "She found another way," I said softly. "She found me." He caught my hand before I could withdraw it, pressing my palm against his cheek. His eyes searched mine, and in their depths I saw something I had not dared to hope for. "Eleanor," he said, and the sound of my name on his lips sent a shiver through my entire body. "Why did you stay? After you took the necklace, you could have fled. You could have sold it and disappeared. Why did you remain?" I swallowed hard. At first, because Vivian would not let me go. Her visions, her whispers, they bound me here. But then I met you. I saw your grief, your guilt, your loneliness, and I wanted to help you find peace. I wanted to give you the answers you deserved. "And now?" he asked. "What do you want now?" The question hung between us, charged with possibility. I knew what I should say. I should tell him that I wanted nothing, that I would accept whatever punishment he deemed fit, that I had no expectations and no claims on his heart. But I was tired of lying, tired of hiding, tired of pretending that the feelings growing within me were anything other than what they were. "I want you," I whispered. "I want to stand beside you when you confront Dr. Hale. I want to help you find justice for Vivian. And when it is over, I want to know if there might be a place for me in your life, not as a servant, not as a thief, but as someone who loves you." The word escaped before I could catch it. Love. I had spoken it aloud, and there was no taking it back. The Duke stared at me, his expression unreadable. For one agonizing moment, I thought I had destroyed everything, and then he kissed me. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate, hungry, filled with 2 years of grief and loneliness and longing finally finding release. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me close, and I melted into him as though I had been made for this moment, for this man, for this impossible love that had grown in the shadow of death. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his hands cradling my face. "I do not deserve you," he said hoarsely. "I do not deserve this second chance. Let me be the judge of what you deserve," I replied. He almost smiled. It was the first time I had seen anything resembling joy on his face. "Tomorrow," he said, "we will deal with Hale. We will bring him to justice and give Vivian the peace she deserves. But tonight, Eleanor, tonight I want to pretend that we are simply 2 people who have found each other in the darkness." I kissed him again, softly this time, and the ruby pulsed warm and steady between us, as though Vivian herself were blessing our union. Tomorrow would bring confrontation and danger. Tomorrow would bring reckoning. But tonight, for the first time since I had arrived at Thornfield Hall, I felt something I had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. The morning dawned cold and clear, the kind of autumn day that seems washed clean by the night's darkness. I rose early, dressed carefully, and fastened the ruby necklace around my throat one final time. Today, I would wear it openly. Today, there would be no more hiding. Gabriel met me in the breakfast room, and though we did not speak of what had passed between us the night before, his eyes lingered on mine with a warmth that made my heart flutter. He had sent word to Dr. Hale at first light, summoning him to Thornfield Hall on the pretense of consulting about Lady Marguerite's health. The trap was set. All that remained was to spring it. "Are you certain you wish to be present?" Gabriel asked as we waited in the drawing room. "What we are about to do may be unpleasant." "I am certain," I replied. "Vivian led me to this truth. I will see it through to the end." He reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "Whatever happens, Eleanor, know that I am grateful for everything." Before I could respond, the butler announced Dr. Hale's arrival. The physician entered with his usual air of smooth confidence, his pale eyes sweeping the room before settling on me with a flicker of surprise. "Miss Ashwood, I did not expect to find you here." "Miss Ashwood is here at my request," Gabriel said coldly. "Please sit down, Dr. Hale. We have matters to discuss." Something shifted in the doctor's expression, a wariness that had not been there before. He lowered himself into a chair, his gaze darting between us. "Of course, Your Grace. How may I be of service?" Gabriel did not sit. He stood by the fireplace, his posture rigid, his hands clasped behind his back. "You may begin by explaining these." He produced the bundle of letters and tossed them onto the table between them. Dr. Hale's face went white. "Where did you get those?" he demanded. "That is not your concern," Gabriel replied. "What concerns me is their contents. My wife wrote to you, Dr. Hale. She wrote of treatments that made her worse, not better. She wrote of medicines that clouded her mind and twisted her visions into nightmares. She wrote that you were using her as an experiment." The doctor's composure cracked, just slightly. "Your Grace, you must understand." The Duchess was a remarkable woman. Her gifts were unlike anything I had ever encountered. I was trying to help her, to understand her condition, so that I might find a cure. "A cure?" Gabriel's voice rose, sharp with fury. "You poisoned her. You exploited her trust and drove her to the brink of madness. And when she threatened to expose you, you followed her to the cliffs and pushed her to her death." "No." Dr. Hale shot to his feet, his face contorted with desperation. "No, that is not what happened. I never touched her. I swear it." "Then explain to me," Gabriel said, stepping closer, his voice deadly quiet, "how my wife came to fall from those cliffs on a night when no one else was present." "Explain explain how a woman who had lived on this estate her entire married life suddenly lost her footing on a path she had walked 100 times before. The doctor's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. I rose from my seat and moved to stand beside Gabriel. The ruby pulsed against my skin, warm and insistent, and I knew that Vivienne was with us, watching, waiting. "I know what you did," I said quietly. "Vivienne showed me. She has been showing me since the night I first wore her necklace. The visions, the whispers, the memories that are not my own. She cannot rest because of you, Dr. Hale. She cannot move on until the truth is known." The doctor stared at me, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in his eyes. "That is impossible. The dead do not speak." "They do," I replied. "When they have been wronged, they find a way. Vivienne found me." He shook his head, backing toward the door. "You are mad, both of you. I will not stand here and be accused of murder based on the fantasies of a hysterical woman." "You will stand exactly where you are," Gabriel said, his voice like iron. "I have already sent word to the magistrate. He is on his way. You will answer for what you have done, Hale. If not to me, then to the law." The doctor's face twisted with rage. "You have no proof. Letters and ghost stories will not convict me." "Perhaps not," I said. "But Vivienne kept records. Detailed records of every treatment you gave her, every medicine you prescribed, every symptom that followed. I found them hidden in her room, tucked beneath the floorboards where she knew no one would look. The magistrate will find them most illuminating. It was a bluff. I had found no such records, but the effect on Dr. Hale was immediate and devastating. His composure shattered completely, and he lunged toward me with a snarl. "You lying little thief," he spat. "You think you can destroy me? I will see you hanged before I let you ruin everything I have worked for." Gabriel moved faster than I would have thought possible. He caught the doctor by the collar and threw him backward, sending him crashing into a side table. Porcelain figurines shattered on the floor. "You will not touch her," Gabriel said, standing over the fallen man. "You will not threaten her, and you will not escape justice." Dr. Hale lay amid the wreckage, his breath coming in ragged gasps. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, the fight seemed to drain out of him. "She was going to ruin me," he whispered. "All my research, all my work, years of study into the nature of the human mind and its connection to the unseen. She was going to tell everyone what I had done, and no one would have understood. They would have called me a monster." "You are a monster," Gabriel said. The doctor laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "Perhaps, but I am also a man who saw something extraordinary and wanted to understand it. Vivienne's gift was real, Your Grace. She could see beyond the veil, could hear the whispers of the dead. I thought if I could study her, if I could isolate the source of her power, I might unlock the greatest mystery of human existence." "And so you poisoned her," I said. "You drove her mad with your experiments. I pushed her too far." He closed his eyes. The medicines were meant to enhance her visions, to make them clearer, more controllable. Instead, they broke something inside her. By the end, she could not distinguish between the living and the dead. She saw ghosts everywhere, heard voices constantly. She was terrified, and I could not stop it. "So you stopped her instead," Gabriel said grimly. Dr. Hale opened his eyes, and in them I saw something I had not expected. Remorse. I followed her to the cliffs that night. I wanted to reason with her, to convince her not to expose me. But she would not listen. She was standing at the edge, screaming into the wind, and when I reached for her, she pulled away. She lost her balance. I tried to catch her, but I was too late. He looked up at Gabriel, his face streaked with tears. "I did not push her, Your Grace. I swear on my soul, I did not push her. But I drove her to that cliff. I drove her to her death as surely as if I had thrown her over myself." The room fell silent. I looked at Gabriel, saw the conflict warring across his features. He wanted to believe the doctor was lying, wanted a simple villain he could punish and destroy. But I could feel the ruby pulsing against my chest, and I knew with a certainty that came from somewhere beyond myself that Dr. Hale was telling the truth. He had not murdered Vivian, but he had destroyed her just the same. The magistrate arrived within the hour. Dr. Hale confessed to everything, his voice flat and empty, all his arrogance stripped away. He was taken into custody and charged with reckless endangerment, with administering dangerous substances without proper consent, with contributing to the death of a noblewoman through criminal negligence. It was not murder, not in the eyes of the law, but it was enough. He would spend the rest of his life in prison, his reputation in ruins, his research destroyed. Justice, perhaps, was never perfect, but it was something. That evening, I stood alone on the cliffs where Vivian had fallen. The sun was setting over the moors, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and the wind carried the scent of salt and heather. I had asked Gabriel to let me come here alone. There was something I needed to do. I unfastened the necklace from my throat and held it in my hands. The ruby pulsed gently, warm as a living heart, and as I gazed into its crimson depths, I felt Vivian's presence one final time. She did not appear to me as a vision. There were no whispers, no fragmented memories. Instead, there was simply a feeling, a warmth that wrapped around me like an embrace, and a voice that seemed to come from within my own heart. Thank you. Tears streamed down my face. You are welcome, I whispered. I am sorry for what he did to you. I am sorry no one believed you. The warmth intensified, and I understood what she was trying to tell me. She did not blame Gabriel. She did not blame anyone. She had loved her husband, and she had been lost in a darkness not of her own making. All she had wanted, all she had needed, was for someone to know the truth, to understand, to remember her not as a madwoman, but as a woman who had been wronged. He loves you, I said. He never stopped loving you. I know, came the reply, soft as a sigh. And now he can love again. Take care of him, Eleanor. Give him the happiness I could not. The warmth began to fade, and I felt a gentle tug at the necklace in my hands. Without thinking, I lifted my arm and let the chain slip through my fingers. It did not fall. Instead, the necklace rose into the air, carried by an invisible hand, and for one breathless moment, I saw her. Vivian. She stood before me, radiant and beautiful, her golden hair streaming in the wind, her green eyes bright with joy. She smiled at me, a smile of gratitude and blessing, and then she turned and walked toward the setting sun. The ruby pulsed one final time, a heartbeat of farewell, and then she was gone. The necklace fell to the grass at my feet, its chain glittering in the fading light, and the ruby lay still and silent, just a stone once more. I knelt and picked it up. The warmth was gone, the pulse had stopped. Vivian had found her peace at last. Gabriel was waiting for me when I returned to the house. He stood on the front steps, his dark coat billowing in the evening breeze, his gray eyes fixed on me with an expression of such tenderness that my breath caught in my throat. "Is it done?" he asked. I nodded and held out the necklace. "She is at rest. She wanted me to tell you that she forgives you. She wanted me to tell you to be happy." He took the necklace from my hands and stared at it for a long moment. When he looked up again, his eyes were glistening. "I spent 2 years believing I had failed her," he said quietly, "believing that her death was my fault, that I should have seen the truth and saved her. And now I learn that the truth was darker than I ever imagined, and also simpler. She was taken from me by a man I trusted, and there was nothing I could have done to prevent it." He stepped closer, cradling my face in his hands. "But you, Eleanor, you gave me something I thought I would never have again. You gave me answers. You gave me closure. You gave me hope." I reached up and covered his hands with my own. "What happens now?" "Now," he said, "we begin again, together." He kissed me then, soft and sweet, and when we broke apart, he was smiling. It was the first true smile I had ever seen on his face, unguarded and full of light. "Marry me," he said. I laughed, startled. "Gabriel, I am a thief. I stole your wife's necklace. I lied to you from the moment I arrived. You are also the woman who uncovered the truth about Vivian's death," he replied. "The woman who freed her spirit and gave me peace. The woman I have fallen in love with. Against all reason and expectation, I do not care about your past, Eleanor. I care about our future." I looked into his eyes, those gray eyes that had once seemed so cold and now burned with warmth, and I knew my answer. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." He swept me into his arms and spun me around, and my laughter rang out across the moors, bright and free. We were married in the spring, when the roses were blooming and the moors were carpeted with wildflowers. Lady Marguerite stood as witness, her sharp eyes soft with unexpected tears. Mrs. Blackwood wept openly into her handkerchief. And when Gabriel slipped the Ashworth ruby onto my finger, reset now as a ring, I felt a faint pulse of warmth, just for a moment, like a blessing from beyond the veil. I never saw Vivian again, but sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun sets over the cliffs and the wind carries the scent of jasmine, I feel her presence. Not as a ghost, not as a haunting, but as a friend, watching over me, glad that the man she loved has found happiness once more. My name is Eleanor Ashworth, Duchess of Ashworth, and I came to Thornfield Hall as a desperate woman willing to steal for survival. I leave this account as a testament to the strange and wondrous path that led me here, to love and redemption and a future I never dared to dream. Some thefts, it seems, cannot be undone, but some thefts, against all odds, lead us exactly where we were meant to be.